Live. All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Boss Uncaged Book Club. And we have a returning boss. And, originally I named him the researcher boss, but I think the more and more I know this man, the more and more he's the mad scientist boss through and through. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book and just kind of give us like a quick rundown. What do you like to talk about today?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people. I've had lots of conversations with people that associates, and they're like, I want to write a book, um, and I think there's certainly a pride factor in writing a book. I think a lot of people, even those people who ultimately write a book, at first start off, and this can't be all people. Some people are just like they know they have a book in them. A lot of people, and I certainly fell into this category, just thought like I don't really have like I have cool stories, I have fun stories, they're good to share over a beer, but I didn't think it was book worthy, and frankly, even to the point. So I knew really for kind of business purposes and sharing content as I was accumulating it, I did need to write a book.
Mhm.
But even as I ultimately found, and I can tell that story, but as I ultimately found my co-author, I was still thinking that I wasn't going to write a book. My co-author was going to interview me, and then he was going to watch some of the videos, some of the content that I have out there, and then he was going to go off and write a book, and he was going to come back and he was going to set the book in front of me, and I was going to write, that's a great book, let's publish it, and then we would be done with the book. And kind of funny story, the very first meeting we had about the book, we had already had a number of conversations, but he's like, okay, so Chris, I need you to write down your story. And in that moment, I was like, I guess I'm writing a book. And quite a compliment. My co-author is a two-time New York Times #1 bestseller. I think a lot of people realize it's not easy to get on the New York Times bestseller list. It's exponentially harder to get onto the New York Times #1 position. And he's done that twice. So as I'm putting together kind of my notes or writing down my story, he gave me a great compliment. He was like, I really actually like your writing style, like how you tell stories. The prose needed to be fixed, and he did a fabulous job doing that. But it was quite a compliment. So we're here to talk that. I know that doesn't, if that answered any part of your question, that was probably accidental. I
No,
just,
but it gives me a lot of different things to talk about. I mean, based off of where your mind's at right now. So, I mean, obviously, first of all, the name of the book is Live Longer and Better. And I think I'm really going to be talking about that as a premise to everything that you've been doing and talking about the supplement as well. But since you brought up Jeremy, I just want to kind of talk about, like, I mean, he wrote the forward for your book. How did that go? And like you talking about how he told you to write. And so once you kind of like approached him, because most writers, they don't even think about forwards, and the ones that do think about forwards, they don't know who to get. They would like, do I hire someone famous? How do you kind of even get into the space to get someone to write that forward for you?
well, the book was the entire book, not just the forward, was a total collaboration. And let me kind of roll back a little bit. It was probably in the middle of the pandemic that I was like, as you very well know, books are good for business, right? They're a good way to get speaking gigs. They're a good way to have kind of instant credibility. And so from that business perspective, I knew I wanted to write a book. I've always been involved and provided content in terms of a podcast. I started one way back in 2005. I was the co-host of that podcast all the way until last year, 2024, excuse me, 2023. Um, I've always felt as you accumulate knowledge, you should do two things with it. You should share it. And the second thing that happens by sharing it is when you teach, is when you really learn the information. So as you write these books down is when you really cement that information in your head. So it was really, how do I give back all of this knowledge that I'm in the process of accumulating, and also for the business purposes. I knew I wanted, I never fancied myself a writer. I think everybody, has written a poem and like, oh, that's pretty good, I should do more. And then they don't. And then, maybe I remember a very particular story on a vacation about a buddy of mine who plays the congos, and we were at a club in New York, and he actually pulled a conga off of the wall, right? And I'm like, oh, we're getting kicked out, right? And he starts playing, and the bouncer was okay with it. And then I go to the bathroom, come back, and Joe was putting it back because the bouncer says you get like 5 minutes. And the bouncer was like, no, 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 take it back down. Right. So I wrote that story down and I gave it to a friend. And I said, like, what did you think of that story? He goes, well, you wrote it exactly as you told it, so I think I kind of knew I had some skills in that area, but I knew I needed a co-author. The first person that I reached out to was Matthew LaPlante. He is the co-author with Dr. David Sinclair in Lifespan. The title of the book is Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, which is an amazing book. 25 years of a Harvard researcher. I even referenced that book in my book. And so I reached out to him and he was like, yeah, I'm too busy. I'm not even sure he was in my budget, but I'm busy. I don't have any, I've got too many projects. And then one day I was on the phone and I love to talk to customers. I love to talk to people. I really do. And as I get busier and busier, that has to get kind of quelled down. I'm spending less time on the phone. But I'm on this one phone call, and you've probably had this phone call. It was like, it's a great phone call. Like you've got a click, you got a rapport, and part of you is like, well, I'm enjoying this, but I don't know where it's going, right? Like, is he just going to be a customer? Well, who knows what's going to happen? And at one point, I searched him up and I saw that he was a 2-time New York Times #1 bestseller. And kind of in my small mind, I was like, oh, we're on the phone together because he's going to be my co-author. and then I kind of proposed it, and he was in the right place with the books. He's a prolific writer. And what I was trying to accomplish, and we got along really well. And so we really kicked off that project pretty quickly. And then it went to that meeting where, Chris, you've got to write your story down, and it's just been an amazing. We're working on another book already. He's in the middle of other books, and if you've done any research, and I imagine you have, he can be a controversial figure for sure. And so I did weigh that into my decision, right? Like, am I gonna, he's written political books, and I think it would be fair to say they're fairly one-sided, and that can be polarizing with people. And so I just said, you know what, this is a book about health. He's a talented writer, and that's what my focus was. And so we proceeded. And he was actually one of the speakers in my longevity summit. I brought him in. Doesn't naturally fit in the longevity space, but I brought him in because he's written economics books. He's written political books. He's at one point was a consultant on terrorism for the U.S. government. At another point, he was in finance, right? So he's had this really diverse, long-lived career in a variety of areas, diversity there. I just thought he would be a good person to bounce the ideas. Like, what do you think? You're kind of a futurist. What do you think if man is going to live extremely long or forever? How do we lay that out? And how do we make sure, as technologies typically come out, they tend to end in the laps of the wealthy? And how do we make sure that gets at some point, how do we bring the costs down, and how do we make this available to everybody, whether they have the budget or not? It was a really fascinating conversation with him. So he even participated on that longevity summit.
Wow. So I think that's a hell of a segue for like the first chapter, the introduction, right? Because I mean, that's kind of like the title in a long format way. I mean, you're talking about reinventing yourself and imagine being able to live to 125 years old. So first of all, if we take it back to biblical times, people were living to like several hundred years, and it's kind of like unbelievable. And now you're talking about, living a fraction of that, but obviously living more than the average 80 years. So like just talk about that. Like, how did you even get to that number? Because that's an extra quarter of a century, right?
Yeah.
Where does that come from, and what like, how are you doing it? Like, let's talk about the supplement behind it.
Yeah, no, perfect. I may have never gotten to it. So thank you for the question. So how did I end up writing a book called Live Longer and Better? I've been manufacturing since 1991 a molecule, and I'm holding up a model of the molecule. If you're listening, just imagine a soccer ball where the lines on the soccer ball represent the bonds between the carbon atoms. So you have a spherical molecule of 60 carbon atoms. This molecule was discovered here in Houston at Rice University. That's where I'm based. I'm based in Houston. It was discovered in 85, and the three scientists who discovered it won the Nobel Prize for that discovery in 1996. So we're talking about Nobel Prize-winning technology. Again, we started manufacturing in 1991, and actually it's been the process of getting on, again, you cement knowledge in your head as you talk about it more, right? As you write it down, as you explain it to other people. And it really dawned on me the other day, which really should seem obvious, but we started manufacturing in 91. They got awarded the Nobel Prize in 96, right? So 11 years from discovery to being awarded, because they discovered it in 85. And then it's 5 years from when we start manufacturing for them to get awarded the Nobel Prize. We're probably a big reason they got the Nobel Prize. And let me kind of walk you through that. If scientists around the globe didn't have access to macroscopic quantities, so quantities that they could put in a petri dish or put into a beaker and mix with different chemicals and begin to understand what this molecule could do, then nobody would know how fantastic this molecule. I mean, the shape already is fantastic. It's the first closed cage molecule. It's got six-fold symmetry. So it's got more symmetry in this molecule than any other molecule that is out there. What that means is there's 6 planes through which the molecules direct, exactly a mirror of itself. You can actually fire this molecule at a plate of steel at 50,000, I think it's 50,000 miles per hour, where most molecules will just shatter apart. This one, in my mind, it compresses like a ball and then springs right back. So it doesn't shatter. That's because of its resilience. So just those things we knew really quickly. But what other things it can do? In the early days, people will ask what it would do. In our joke, I'll just throw this out there. Our joke is it's great for funding, because when we started the company in 1991. All 10 of the 10 most referenced scientific papers, right? So there's a group out there who's like, where the references go. And by the way, this is pre-internet, so this is like a manual job. I mean, it's still on a computer, but it's not with the internet, right? Where do all the references go to? All 10 of the 10 most referenced papers were related to this molecule or fullerenes in general. That's kind of the as discovered carbon molecules. So this is a scientific viral discovery and explosion that's happening right as we're delivering this material. One of the first company, one company beat us, but they didn't last the first year. So we're the oldest and longest manufacturer of this molecule. Mm-hmm. And so we were delivering these materials. And so, hey, it makes better inks. Well, you find that by putting it in ink substances, and you have to have macroscopic quantities. It makes better batteries, and you find that out because you take enough of the powder and you stick it in your experiment, and you find out that it makes a good battery. It makes better solar cells.
Wait a minute. So you're saying like this same exact compound, the same exact molecule could be used for all these different items.
Okay. Inks, batteries, tires, photocells. It turns out, and we'll get to this in just a second, but this shape, so there's one shape, one of the facets of the soccer ball, one of those little panels on the soccer ball, is exactly like benzene. Benzene is a necessary component of modern society. We do not have modern society without benzene. If you just look in your room and imagine everything plastic gone, right? Because its foundation is benzene. Like, and that's enough. Maybe we should have not invented plastics. Like, we could have that debate now. but we don't have modern society without those plastics. It's in a lot of, the basis of aspirin is a benzene ring. The basis of many detergents. Like, again, we don't have modern society without it. It turns out, so you can imagine that's a core molecule, a keystone molecule that they build a lot of chemistry on in order to make other things. It turns out all of that chemistry, all of the benzene chemistry works on this molecule. We call it ESS60 if you're going to consume it, or we call it C60 if you're going to use it for industrial applications. All of that chemistry, so all those years we've been working with it, actually do apply to the ball. So when you say, as is it used in solar cells? Well, no, they actually have to make a variation of it, but they know the chemistry works already. It's also superconducting. It's big enough for any atom on the periodic chart to fit inside of it.
Mhm.
which means it turns out there's a new symbol in chemistry. We're familiar with the @ symbol for our email address. Well, now you have lanthanum, one of the, atoms on the periodic chart, elements on the periodic chart. Lanthanum at C60 means lanthanum physically trapped inside of it. So not covalently or ionically bonded to the exterior, but physically trapped inside of it. Again, this is the first molecule that's even possible. I kind of joke. I think that's when you're going to get a Nobel Prize in chemistry is when what you discovered adds a new symbol to the language of chemistry, right? The @ symbol. they were on the right path. So yeah, this molecule is amazing in all of these regards. And so the first joke is, hey, it's good for funding because right now there's a funding craze, and if you do funding if you write a proposal, you're probably going to get funded. And I think this is a good time to throw this little piece, which is pretty amazing. We knew from the beginning it's very expensive to make. So let me talk about that. In order to manufacture, so first off, it's a naturally occurring molecule. If you take a candle flame, by the way, if you need to interrupt at any point, just wave. I'm going off. If you take a candle flame and you collect the soot off of it, and you usually do that by putting a cold steel plate over it, and you get that black soot on it. That black soot has parts per million, parts per billion of this ESS60 molecule in it. So it is absolutely a naturally occurring molecule. When the asteroid hit the planet, right, and killed the dinosaurs, that layer is called the KT boundary. That layer has a significantly higher quantity of this ESS60 molecule than the rest of the layers of Earth, and then that you would find typically. And when you go back to biblical times, there is no foundation for this theory, but I think it's fun to throw out, which is maybe the lighting source that we had at that in those times was such that it produced more of this ESS60 molecule, so we were actually exposed to more of it. Just fun to throw that out. I'm like, I give that about a 3% chance of being true.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating for sure. I mean, it kind of leads me down to another path that in that same exact chapter, and you had made a comparison about Joe the plumber. So I want you to kind of like talk about that, because I mean, obviously there's an adventurous approach and there's a conventional path, and Joe falls in the conventional aspects. I want you to kind of talk about how did that fall into this book.
Yeah, Joe, I brought in Joe the plumber because really just brainstorming with my team. We're manufacturing this molecule and it's for industrial purposes. And then they thought it would be toxic. They throw it in a toxicity study. Instead of being toxic, the test subjects that they gave it to, in this case, it was Wistar rats, lived 90% longer than the control group, right? So now I end up having the responsibility of finding, well, is 90% a big deal? Turns out it's a really big deal. It is literally the longest longevity experimental result on mammals ever. The next best way and documented way to live longer is calorie restriction. If you reduce your calorie consumption by 30%, you can extend your life by 30%. So my role at that point is to try and understand longevity and where does longevity fit, and that's where I got into the book Lifespan by Dr. David Sinclair, and he's talking about very confidently with research in experience and intelligence behind him. So a Harvard medical researcher, not a medical doctor, but a medical researcher who's been working for 25 years on longevity, starting with yeast. And it turns out that the mechanisms that allowed really creatures to live at all is also the mechanisms that kind of cause them to die. And so that research that applies to yeast actually ends up carrying up through to us. And they've certainly carried it up through to, larger models as soon as big as mice and rats. And so I'm trying to figure this longevity space out. And I start thinking, well, what if we can live longer? Like David Sinclair very confidently says that we could potentially live forever. And I think he would actually change that to probably we will live forever. But what does that mean? And it suddenly kind of dawned on me. There's a lot of people out there, like we'll call him Joe the plumber, who've mapped out with a financial planner. Hopefully people have done that, right? They've mapped out with a financial planner, hey, you just got to work these 4 more years and then you're set, right? And it's all of the math is based off of the fact that you're going to die around 83, right? But what happens if you let's not even go live forever. What happens if you just live 50% longer? So you get to 120. Your money is gone at 80. So you've got to reinvent yourself. And then what is it, how many people, and I pulled some stats in the book, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but how many people are dissatisfied with their job, right? So you have this clear picture of they're waking up and they're going through the grind and getting through their day, and their map is, hey, I just got to do this garbage, this plumbing for 4 years, and then I'm done. That's their words, not my words. I'm very appreciative of plumbers, right? I've just got to do this stuff for 4 more years, and then I'm good. Then I can retire. Oh, wait, but you're going to live another 40 years. So you really need to work another 15 years. Okay, well, now it's time to reinvent yourself, right? Because 4 years sustainable, 15 years probably not sustainable. And so that's really, I'm starting a podcast. It's almost entirely focused on health in the beginning, but it's called Live Beyond the Norms. And that's our tagline. I think it's back there. Live Beyond the Norms is, hey, the norm is 80. So let's live past that. The norm is maybe not is at best contentment, or not at best, typically contentment, maybe even just like not that pissed off about your job and about what's going on in your life. And so I've just been on this journey myself, and I'm thinking how a lot of my own journey could be used to help people kind of navigate this world of potentially living a lot longer.
So I think it's definitely interesting, and I think this is a really good segue, because I mean I've also shared this on my foodie side, right? Because I want to really talk about like the choice of olive oil, and I don't remember, like, I think you did mention it in one of the chapters. I want to talk about like the journey of figuring out, and why did you guys decide to use olive oil out of all the things and make it more of like a food byproduct supplement versus just being in an IV drip or something along those lines?
Yeah. So the reality is, it may be disappointing to learn that it's not my genius. Like it's not me. I often describe, I'll kind of share this. I often describe people who ended up in the supplement business one of two ways, typically. One of them is they wake up and they decide they want to be rich, and they are going to do it with a nutritional supplement. And I have no problem with people being rich. That's just not how I ended up here. The other is often, the pain to passion story, where they've got their own physical health challenge, or they've got the health challenge of a loved one, and they go and solve it. They solve it with nutrition. They solve it with supplementation. They solve it with kind of cutting edge technologies like maybe hyperbaric chambers. And then now they want to save the world. And hopefully it doesn't surprise you, I am not against people saving the world. I just didn't end up in this industry that way. I've been manufacturing this kind of a Nobel Prize-winning molecule since 1991. They thought it would be toxic. They put it in a toxicity study. The test subjects lived 90% longer than the control group. And so now that kind of thrust us. And really my business partner, to be candid, that publication came out in mid-2012. Mid-2013, we started getting phone calls. Hey, how much of this should I be consuming? And my business partner and I, you got to imagine us, we're happy-go-lucky carbon nanomaterial scientists. We've got our conservative carbon nanomaterial hats on, and we're going, wait a minute, you're asking us how much of this stuff that we sell to research institutions around the world so that they can put it in inks, batteries, tires, and photocells, how much should you be consuming? We're going to go with 0. We actually put not for human consumption on our labeling in mid-2013. So you think from 1991 all the way to 2013, we don't have not for human consumption on our labeling, and we added them. Let me be clear. In the literature, it was safe, right? If you processed it properly, which we call, again, ESS 60, it's safe. But we're conservative scientists, and like the concept of, like if I just ask you right now, SA, what components of your car battery do you think you might want to consider consuming daily?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right?
Maybe the water in the old batteries. Like, like if you're gonna make me take something, I'll gnaw on, I don't know, some stainless steel. That would be the safest thing probably. So that's where we were coming from. And so in mid-2013, not for human consumption, we're getting 1 or 2 phone calls a week. Those phone calls are saying, hey, my knee pain is gone. And we're like, you mean the knee pain of your rat, right? Because it literally says not for human consumption on it. And they're like, yeah. Should I double the dose, or how much more should I take? That was happening, again, 2 to 3 phone calls a week from mid 2013 all the way to 2017. In 2017, a guy with a big YouTube following started talking about all the benefits he was getting taking the product on a daily basis. And our phone went from 2 to 3 calls a week to 10 calls a day. And so now my business partner and I were like, okay, well, this is an entrepreneurial opportunity outside the scale that we had understood. We asked ourselves 2 questions. The first is the moral question, and am I comfortable selling it? I take it. My wife takes it. Everybody on our team here takes it. Not a requirement to work on our team. And so, yes, we're comfortable selling it. And then next is the FDA and the FTC. You got to dot the I's, cross the T's, and we're certainly doing that. And so it was the beginning of 2018 that we brought it. Now, to get to your actual question, which is why olive oil and like why not an IV drip? Again, in reality, because this shape on the exterior of the soccer ball is reminiscent of benzene, although benzene is, ubiquitous in our society and necessary for modern society, it's also a known, when it's on its own, not when it's got components attached to it, it's also a known carcinogen and known to be toxic. So they actually assumed that this soccer ball shaped molecule would be toxic, and they put it in a study. It turns out that this molecule dissolves. It's not water soluble. So if you just put a bunch of the powder, the product is a black powder. Basically, if you put that powder in water, it just floats there. It doesn't dissolve in water. Or if you shake it vigorously enough, you can get it to kind of suspend briefly. But it does dissolve in oils. And the study that where they extended the life of test subjects by 90%. By the way, my lab provided the material and were mentioned in that original study. So originators of this molecule to begin with, and then originators of this turning into a health supplement. They're out of the University of Paris. And in my mind, olive oil was a choice, and they had some on the shelf, and they're like, well, let's dissolve it in olive oil and give it to rats. And so I think that's why it ended up. And then in that study, so this fascinating study, a typical Wistar rat lives 32 months and has a known amount of tumor mass in its body. So the longer it lives, the more tumors it gets in its body. Even though the MyVitalC rats lived 90% longer, none of them had any tumors in their body, right? And I'm just going to share this. A lot of people are like, oh, cure for cancer. And the answer to that is no, like unequivocally no. The reality is it's significantly harder to manage a cancer that's metastasized than to be a cancer preventative. We know things as easy as good nutrition, good sleep, good exercise are cancer preventatives. That piece of the study kind of indicates we need to dig more into that aspect. Sure. And so they were the ones that drove the olive oil. And then, when we got really into the market to create the same product so that somebody else could recreate the rat study that said not for human consumption on it, we chose the same oil. In fact, the same Tunisian oil that we use in some of our products today.
So that leads me to chapter 5. I mean, chapter 5, you were talking about living longer, living better, and you're kind of alluding to that. So I want you to kind of talk about it from the standpoint of, now that you have it in oil, right? Like, what's stopping it from then going one step further? I mean, cannabis started as a plant, and then it went to cannabis oil, and then there's cannabis edibles. Yeah. Are you guys thinking about that down the road? And I want you to kind of talk about, like, how is that going to help someone if they're consuming it on different levels? Like, they're consuming it based upon the olive oil, or they're consuming it versus eating an edible. Is this still going to be a better result potentially?
Yeah, we certainly hope, wish, dream to replicate the popularity of CBD, right? Because at one point CBD is a forbidden fruit, and then now it's on every street corner, right? Like that would be great for, I think, for people who consume the product. We just get nothing but good testimonials. So I think that would be great for the public. Obviously, it would be great for me as a business owner. We typically sell 3 oils, right? And you've got this box there behind you, and one in front of you. Yeah. This is our olive oil. So we sell it in olive oil, we sell it in avocado oil, and we sell it in MCT oil. And I'll talk about my routine in just a second. It turns out, if anybody ever asks, like, which one would you recommend? The entire company says olive oil for two reasons. The first reason is we're a research-based organization, and all of the research is on the ESS60 molecule in olive oil. The next is because we're actually able to get more of this molecule to dissolve in olive oil than avocado or MCT. So we get about 0.8 milligrams per milliliter in the olive, 0.6 in the avocado, and then 0.3 in the MCT. My typical routine, just to share, you're familiar with Bulletproof Coffee, right? Like everybody is. Kind of cool. On my longevity summit, I got a chance to interview him, which was an exciting experience. Bulletproof Coffee is typically a high quality coffee, ghee, and MCT oil. I pull the ghee out. I just don't want those calories, but I do put our MCT. And so that's what I use in my coffee every day. While that's blending, because it's an oil and water thing, so it's blending, I take 1.5 teaspoons of our olive oil. Our typical recommended serving is 1 teaspoon of one. And then I'm typically putting our avocado oil on my salad, which I have for lunch typically.
So, I mean, that's interesting. So, I mean, with that, I mean, could you not put these in capsules as well?
Yeah. So we do have it in capsules. I don't think I have a bottle of capsules. Oh, I do. It's always fun to hear it rattle. We did make it in capsules because a typical serving is 1 teaspoon. We really only get 2 complaints about our product, and it's a minor percentage of people who will complain. The first one is that we use a high quality extra virgin olive oil, and that a high quality extra virgin olive oil will actually leave a peppery flavor at the back of your throat. And a lot of people just aren't used to that. We, as Americans, we typically don't consume as much olive oil as, Europeans. We may not be consuming as high quality. In fact, if you go to some chain Italian restaurants, sometimes they'll pour the olive oil on a plate for you to dip your bread in, and they'll crack some pepper in it. What they're actually doing is taking an inexpensive olive oil and making it taste more expensive. That pepper at the back of your throat is a high quality extra virgin olive oil. So that's one complaint. And that's fairly small. Let's give that 5%. Because some people just kind of realize the benefit and move on. And the other is, if you're not taking much oil and you add 1 teaspoon, that's the typical serving, it can run through you for a couple of days, and then your body gets used to it. And so it can cause some loose stool for a couple of days. Also a very small percentage of people, and they quickly realize like it goes away after a couple of days. Even with that, there's a couple of reasons. So we do have and you got some of these, right? Some of our ampules. So yeah. Our ampules are a good way to go on with carry-on luggage, right? These bottles are too big and they could get confiscated, and our product is not inexpensive because of the manufacturing, which we didn't even touch too much time on. But these, work with the TSA just fine. And then of course the capsules do. For anybody who doesn't like the flavor, it turns out, and these aren't huge capsules, but they're not small, you still need to take 6 to get 1 teaspoon. So we kind of recommend 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. And we have, frankly, we had lots of debates about that. Like, do we do a full-on horse pill where we're trying to get 1 teaspoon in 1 serving? Really not a viable solution. And so that's why we have the capsules. Now, to talk about gummies, the reality is, to get a full teaspoon into a gummy, you really end up having a gummy that's more of like a dessert pack. And then you're trying to you got to make it sweet. And then that ends up ultimately not being healthy. And so it's an option. It's just, we're not going. I mean, our first job right now, and continues to be really my job, is to just let more people know about it. Any kind of incremental value that we could be delivering to our customers because we're giving it in a format that they would like, isn't actually expanding the market as fast as we would like, right? We'd like more and more people to be aware of the research. It's really this year that we started going to conference. We've got a booth coming up in 2 weeks in Austin, a booth up in Dallas at Dave Asprey's event. So we're really kind of amping up our marketing so that we can get this to as many people as possible.
Gotcha. So I think like you're kind of leading into the future to a certain segment. I mean, we talked about the 125. We talked about like the issues, the pros and cons, and how you guys are overcoming them. So I want you to talk about the next chapter, which is, how you learn to like love the future and what does that mean for this product. And I want you to kind of talk about maybe some clips from the book.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that I tried to do in the book was, share stories that were impactful, maybe stories that didn't happen that don't happen to other people. I talked about an explosion at our facility, I'll jump into that. I talked about actually falling asleep behind the wheel. Fortunately, nobody was. That's an interesting story, just because of I saw a clip actually today of Elon Musk talking about how starting up a business and business ownership or in CEO level, um, everyone's like, oh, it's fun and it's exciting. It's certainly exciting, but the point that Elon Musk made in this video is like, it's all the garbage goes to the CEO, right? It's all the problems that nobody else is able to solve end up with the CEO. And you also have this overriding stress that if I don't solve this problem potentially quick enough, or if I don't solve the problem in the right way, the company might not make it, right? So you've got the stress of the necessity to get it right, right? And then the fact that you're only dealing with bad problems. I remember a friend of mine was like, I want to be an entrepreneur like you, Chris, one day. And it was like, look, Mo, I've got his name is Mo, obviously. I've got to be honest with you. As an entrepreneur, everyone's your boss. Like everyone's your potential boss. Um, and yeah, I can fire one of my customers, one of my bosses, right? But that has an impact on the company. And so you don't take that lightly. It's not just like, oh, you all, all you customers are not good and you cause problems. So I want you all to go. Like it's everyone's your boss. And I think people don't realize that. Having said all of that, one day I pulled an all-nighter, took an exam at the University of Houston. Our office is about 15 minutes away from maybe 20 from the University of Houston. And I was just tired, right? And I'm driving to the office. I've got things that I want to accomplish. And I actually fell asleep. And the only way I knew I fell asleep is I just woke up and the car that was in front of me was significantly closer than it was the last time I remember. The shot of adrenaline that went through me because of that, like how terrified I was that I had just fallen asleep, was so strong. And what was really scary is that lasted less than a minute. Like, so a minute later, I'm back to nodding off. So even after that jolt, got to the office safely and worked an 8-hour day. Like I just worked 8 because it was so exciting. It was maybe as exciting as almost running into a car, the work that I was doing at that time. So yeah, Elon's right, but he loves what he does, and I really loved what I did. And I share that I was lucky that nobody got injured in that. And so be very mindful of, if you're sleeping, if you're sleepy, pull over. Probably a lot of that was, kind of young 20-ish hubris of what I thought I could accomplish. But those were extremely exciting times in an industry that's kind of revolutioning a lot of other industries. So that was one of the stories in there. And then another one, we had an explosion. It kind of has a funny story as to exactly why it happened. We were testing out a new process. The process had acetylene in it. If you break apart acetylene has a lot of carbon. Well, let me first talk about the actual way you manufacture this and why it's so expensive. Is you take 2 graphite rods, you vaporize them in a chamber. It turns out that graphite is one of the hardest materials on the planet to vaporize. So you run an arc between 2 graphite rods and they're rotating in opposite directions so that they don't get skewed, right? So they're even as they're facing each other. And then you're driving the rods in towards each other because the tips are vaporizing. So this is all coming from outside of a vacuum chamber into a vacuum chamber, all really complex concepts, on top of the fact that it's local temperatures of the sun. It takes the temperature of the sun to actually vaporize graphite. So we had actually incorporated some acetylene, that's from our acetylene torches for cutting steel and welding. because it has a lot of carbon in it, and we were hoping that by pyrolyzing that acetylene, so like by breaking up that acetylene as it flowed through the arc, because we had a flow, that we would actually generate more of the product that we're trying to manufacture. So we did that. We actually had every day a Simpsons break, because Simpsons, they're still on the air, the longest show on air. We would stop every day. We stopped, and then we cracked our chamber and turn on our fan. And what that ended up doing was pulling oxygen into an environment where there was acetylene, and the fan, most fans have a spark. So we had an explosion. There's a small piece. Our neighbor across the street shared that he was sitting on the can, a little constipated, and we helped him. He came across, was like, everyone okay? And everyone was. It did some damage. I think I put in some calculations of what the actual forces that were needed, because the top of one of our chambers just burst off, shattering. Must have been 9 bolts, and one bolt that happened to be larger actually held. Again, be careful what you're doing. Don't have explosions at the office. It's a better plan.
So I mean, that kind of could be a negative or positive PR, and that kind of leads me to your wife. Like Marissa, she is an influencer by default. She's a marketer, but it kind of tells me a little bit about the marketing, right? Because behind the scenes, anyone that knows about book development, book strategies, you're leveraging it in that particular language. She's also fluent in Spanish and German. Have you guys thought about converting the book into these other languages?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll share this first. The audio version of the book has been mastered. I haven't had a chance to look at the mastered, but I'll just say one of the things that stands out. In reality, it can't have been one of the most challenging things. It feels like one of the most challenging things I did was read my own book into a microphone. And I don't know if you've ever tried this, but you stammer on a word and you got to redo it. You mispronounce a word, you got to redo it. And they actually took video of me recording it, because I was hoping we might be able to use that content. And my buddy Nolan was like, hey, can we use any of this? And he's like, no, we can't show this to anyone, because everyone's going to go, why can't you read your own book? Like, this seems ridiculous. But it's hard. And a lot of people that I've interviewed who have done their own audiobook, same kind of story, it's actually a lot harder than people think it is, right? Like, if you're reading to yourself, your mispronunciations and whatever, you get the meaning, it doesn't matter. But when you're actually reading it out loud, it's problematic. I haven't really thought about different languages. My wife is from Panama. That's why she's fluent in Spanish. She turned out amazing influencer, and that's really come on the scene in about the last year and a half. I'm so proud of her, putting great content out there. Her Instagram is Mujeres Vivaces, which means like vibrant women. And her German is good. I don't know that she would say she's fluent anymore. But yeah, I haven't really thought about other languages. I think, honestly, I haven't even had much chance to promote the book, because I think I published it maybe 4 months ago, and then I ended up doing 55 interviews in 2 months. So you've done interviews, you can appreciate 55 interviews in 2 months. That went out as my longevity summit, which ended, I think, just last week, maybe the week before. And so now I'm kind of getting my feet under me, and yeah, it's time to start promoting the book on a larger scale.
So, I mean, talking about like promotions of the book, I mean, your wife is also into like organic spa, and it kind of just seems like the product that you're building kind of goes hand in hand with those shells. Are you thinking about getting your book and the product into multiple different spas around town?
Yeah, well, first off, what you've done some great research. That's awesome. What probably didn't come through is my wife is an amazing salesperson. And so our product is in her spa. Okay. And we're in, wholesale accounts throughout around the United States. I think we've got a couple in Canada and maybe 1 or 2 in Europe. But she's moving more product because she's and she has a lot of passion for the product. The reality is like, she comes home and hears me talking about all the amazing testimonials that we're getting for it. She has her own amazing experiences with it. It's helped her through menopause. That's what her channel talks about a lot is the process of going through menopause. And there's a lot of women out there who are just not aware and confused and frustrated. And here's another woman who's speaking, in this case, in their language, in Spanish. And and connecting with them. But she has a lot of passion for the product, so she sells a lot of product out of her spa. We knew it was probably about a year and a half ago. This kind of get into business strategy. Even before that, we went to a vitamin shop, a GNC. We actually went to a GNC and we're like, hey, what kind of branding do we want to have? And one of the things as I was standing in the store became 100% clear to me was if our products were on the shelf in GNC, it wouldn't matter, right? Because nobody knows about it. And nobody walks into okay, there has to be somebody, but nobody usually walks into a GNC and says, what's the newest thing that no one's ever heard of that I could try, right? Nobody does that. They come in and say, I want something that'll manage this. I want something that'll help me with that. I want something. And so we realized if we're on the shelves anywhere, the person who's behind the counter. So if you think about it from a business strategy perspective, you've got to make 3 sales. You've got to sell to the business owner that your product should be in there. Mm-hmm. You got to sell to the people who work the counter that this is a great product and they should be selling it, and then teach them how to sell it to the actual customers, right? So, and there's companies that do this. There's companies that do this really well, but it's a daunting task from where we're at right now. So in those spas, I mean, what we have in my wife's spa is that passionate owner and person who's interacting with the customers who knows how to sell the product. And so she does really well with it. How do you replicate that? Again, there are sales forces. There's people who put together sales teams. This is not insurmountable, but it's daunting for me. So we hired somebody about a year and a half to go down that path. Really what we confirmed was that, yes, what I just described has to happen. You got to sell the business owner. You got to sell the people who work at the counter and teach them how to sell the people who come in the store. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which is that's a lot of sales and a lot of training for, potentially, kind of, I think at our wholesale level, we're looking for $1,500 to $2,500 sales. And that's at a reduced margin because they've got to have margin so that it makes it worthwhile for them. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on to moving a product into that space. And, we again, our manufacturing process requires temperatures of the sun and vacuum chambers.
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of leads me back to like branding. You're talking about personal branding, business branding. You also talk about a product brand. And so far, what I can tell is like the branding is pretty good in the sense that you guys are leveraging the actual color of carbon on the table, right? So you're leveraging that blue. So I want you to kind of like talk about that. Like, was that something that somebody raised their hand and said, hey, we should just make everything in that blue spectrum? Or like, how did that choice was made for the book cover?
That was literally, so for the book cover, I'll tell you, I wish I had a picture. I don't know if you're familiar with a mole rat. A mole rat is just a butt naked rat. Like It has no hairs, lives underground, and it's one of the longer living mammals on the planet, right? Relative to its size. And so I considered, and I actually found an image of a mole rat sitting in a Zen yoga position, right? Somebody had obviously, photoshopped this, and I considered it, but those things are extremely ugly. Like there's, the book cover would have stood out. Like there's no doubt about that. We went with the whales specifically because of the long, like there's one whale on the cover. Mm-hmm. Specifically because that's a long-lived animal, right? And then actually we have a designer, he's one of our partners here, who just does amazing work. And so he's the one who I was like, hey, let's brainstorm. You brainstorm with AI. We were fortunate enough to be able to kind of play around with AI. You brainstorm like what are some of the other health books that are out there. And we just landed on the whale. If you talk about the blue on the actual box, this was born out of that trip to GNC, right? We were looking across the shelf and around the whole room and across all the shelves, it was a color similar to this that really stood out. And so we're like, that's the color that we should go with.
So you guys went more so based upon what the environment is making purchases on versus, again, talking about carbon's blue on the table. It just happened to fall into line with that.
Well, technically, you got two things. So carbon is usually, it's black, right? When it's in our hand, it's like a black powder, like a black salt. If you just took salt, maybe shrunk the crystals down some, and then turned it black. That's what the powder is. When you put it in MCT, it turns purple, right? And then typically in an olive oil, it still turns purple, but olive oil has a green tint to it already. So it ends up in an amber color. So really, this is the only one, the MCT is the only one that has the purple color that is the actual oil color. And then the olive oil is the blue that we saw at the and I would imagine it's still there. But then there's a potential fallacy there, right? Because I don't know the sales number of GNC. I just know what stood out for the three of us as we're looking at the GNC and we're like, let's go with that color, or at least something similar. Maybe that product doesn't even sell well, and maybe that was a bad decision from a branding, on box branding position. But you make a choice and then you iterate from there. We haven't iterated.
Got it. So let's talk about like the closing out of the book, right? I mean, like when I write my books, I usually try to put like a call of action or a QR code or something that kind of say, hey, you read this information and you want to take the next step. Go. So your book kind of has like a solid close. I want you to talk about the closing, and then after someone reads the book, what is the call of action that you want them to take?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't remember what the closing was. Again, I haven't really had the chance to promote it. If you just ask me what would I want somebody to do after they read this book, I would like them to do more. I would like them to change their mindset about longevity, right? So when I tell the story of the test subjects, in this case, Wistar rats, living 90% longer, I get a surprising amount of people asking, why would I want to live longer? And surprising to me. And it took me a while to understand what they were hearing is, how much longer would you like to live in an infirmed state, right? Because we really can't, and I've got a great example of this, we really can't extract living longer from living in an infirmed and debilitated state. Like we're just mentally, they're the same thing. Every year, like if you just kind of dug into people's mind and says every year after 83 is just bad and getting worse, right? And so if you say, hey, you want to live longer, or hey, there's a study, there's a way to live longer, they're not thinking I'm where I am today living longer. They're thinking at 83, it sucks and it's getting worse. And so what I'd like is that doesn't have to be the case. We're currently in the middle of a quantum shift. The medical community is certainly in a quantum shift about how we think about aging. And that is, if we change that question and we say, SA, if you had the same mental capacity that you have today and the same physical capacity that you have today, would you then be interested in living longer? The answer, and this is interesting because this could go back to the reinvent yourself part of things, the Joe the plumber part of things. Not everyone says yes, but the number dramatically shifts, right? It's from 90% not interested to now 90% interested, right? With a 10% or whatever that actually isn't interested. And those are the people that I would like to think, hey, reinvent yourself, right? They're like, maybe life isn't joyful enough now, although you get some kind of the futurist pessimism of like, the way our country is going now, I don't want to be around, this country or this world. Okay, I get that. That's kind of in a large part, well, you could make the argument that it could be in your control and you could go take control of that. And if you knew you had another 50 years to experience whatever you're experiencing, or let's say another 100 years, maybe you would be more motivated to actually go out and take action. But yeah, it's what I really want is, hey, change your mindset about living longer, right? You can live a lot longer and you can live a lot healthier than you realize. Now, I'm going to give an example of how hard it is for us to extract. I just finished a longevity summit. I interviewed 55 experts in longevity, including names that people might know. Dave Asprey, he created Bulletproof Coffee. Ben Greenfield, famous in longevity and health space. And then Dr. Gundry, a four-time New York Times bestselling author, former practicing cardiothoracic surgeon. So those were some of the headliners in the 55 people I interviewed. I asked all of them these two questions, more obviously, but these two questions. How long do you intend to live? And how long do you think humans can live? and only 3 gave the same number, right? So if you're a longevity expert and you have the mindset that you can live longer and healthier, why isn't that the same number? Right? And the reason is, even these people who are at the forefront of trying to change our mindsets about living longer and living healthier can't separate living longer and living infirmed. Right? So a lot of them are like, I think we can get to 122. How long do you want to live? Well, I just want to live as long as I'm, stable and, it can provide value and I'm not a burden on my loved ones. Okay, but yes, and why isn't that the same number? Like in your mind, shouldn't it be the same number if we're really pushing this envelope? So yeah, it's really hard to extract those pieces, those data points of living longer and living infirmed.
I think it's definitely an interesting philosophy. I mean, obviously, like there's different genomes, right? And some people just happen to live longer. Like, prime example, Clint Eastwood, he's probably going to live to 120 naturally. The dude is still shooting films and directing, and he's closing in on 100. Do you think that individual would probably have the same life spectrum of the 125, or even surplus that by going down the road of using your product?
Yeah, well, so that's yet to be determined. The reality is, yeah, we have the longest longevity experimental result in history. We've got amazing testimonials, which it would be surprising if we don't have a positive impact on longevity and you don't have positive testimonials today, right? Like that it's just not intuitive. Hey, this product has the potential to help you live longer, but you're not going to feel anything. Like those two don't sit well. Certainly would make a nightmare for any sort of marketing attempt, right? Like they're because I think people are notoriously short-sighted, right? And so there's an expense to the product, and if you're saying the benefit is in another 50 years, but you don't feel anything today except for the pain in your pocketbook, like then nobody goes after it. Turns out that we have positive benefits. Longevity studies on humans related to this product just won't be done. We'll probably have some kind of aggregate data where we're looking at a group of people who tended to take the product regularly and they seem to outlive. That's a possibility. But if you think the original study was supposed to be 2.5 years, well, they have three groups in the original study: water, rats that were given water, rats that were given olive oil, and then rats that were given olive oil with the ESS60 molecule. All of the rats given water, so that's the control group, died around 32 months. That's a typical Wistar rat lifespan. The scientists continued to do the animal husbandry to get them until the rest of the rats, until the ESS60 rats, the MyVitalC rats, died out at 62 months. So remember, this was a toxicity study. If there is one thing that's ever true, is when you've got a control group and a quote unquote toxic product group, right? And all of the control group is dead and all of the toxic product group is alive, you can say that product is not toxic, right? Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And really their toxicity study ended at month 32 when that last water rat died. And they did continue to do that for another almost 3 years. So if the average human lives 90% longer, the average human will live to 152. That's not the oldest, right? Because that's where your and my brain goes automatic. Oh, 152, that's better than 120. No, that's the average, right? Right now, the average is 80 with people living out to 122. That would push it out to 152 with the long tail going to be out, and then 70, 80, whatever that number works out. No, it's a lot more, right? A lot more. And so that study's not going to be done. There's just no way to viably do that study, but we'll end up doing with other studies. Now, what I would say is Clint Eastwood is old enough. There's a thing called the terminal velocity of aging, or the escape velocity of aging, which is for every day that we live on this planet, at some point, I believe this will happen, that for every day we are on this planet, the medical community will extend life by a day plus a little, right? So as soon as we get into that, there will be this possibility that we live forever, right? And there will be somebody who is the last person to die of natural causes, which is it wouldn't be good to be that person. I mean, I guess they wouldn't really know, right? But you don't want to be that person. You want to be at minimum the person behind that person in the race, right? Who doesn't actually pass of natural causes. We're obviously, well, without silicon, right? Without computer stuff, can't solve a bus hitting you, can't solve, a parachute not working, but natural causes I believe is going to go away at some point. And I know we're running on time. I'll give this example. In 1950, medical information doubled every 50 years. Today, medical information doubles every 73 days. Right? So it's doubling 4 times in a year. So we have 16 times as much information at the end of this year, assuming it's just flatlined, which is obviously not going to happen. Also, that number, the 73-day number, does not include AI. AI is relatively new. And maybe it doesn't speed up the doubling of medical information. I think it just probably makes the medical information that gets published better, right? So not only are we doubling it every 73 days, the information is going to get fundamentally better. And so if there's anything that you believe is possible with the human body, it's going to happen a lot faster than you realize.
Have you ever seen a movie called Mr. Nobody?
Mr. Nobody. I have not.
So what you just depicted is that movie, right? That movie was an entire movie about a guy's recapping his entire life, but he was the last person to die of natural causes. So what you're talking about, the funny thing is, it's kind of like science and science fiction. Like there's a thin line between both of them. So when you get a chance, you definitely want to check out that movie.
Yeah.
Going into closing, I think a last good question about the book for any author, and your book was actually published through Post Hill Press. I want you to kind of talk about like that process. Was it more so like someone you knew, or did you kind of just deliver the manuscript and said, hey, and you kept delivering the manuscript until you got someone to accept it? Like how did you go through that process to get that book published?
Well, that's certainly a better story, right? The perseverance story is a better story. It just happens that Jerome Corsi, my co-author, is authored, I don't know, 15 some odd books, maybe more, has a relationship with Post Hill. His first book he published actually with the current owner's father. And so has this relationship with Anthony Zaccardi. And so it was just him sending a note saying, hey, I want to write this book. And so we had a deal. It didn't come up with anything up front, right? It was just that Post Hill would publish it. Right. And so I don't have the experience. I think it may be the case. I'm actually kind of working with a number of parties on a second and third book, and I think one of those will end up self-publishing. I think that's one of the ways to go. I think, and you probably know, maybe not this particular number, but a lot of people are like, oh, you publish a book, you probably made a bank on the book. The typical book that gets published, I think on average they say makes like $30,000 in the lifetime of the book, right? So 10 years down the road, you've made $3,000 a year, right? So it's typically not a money-making piece. It's hey, I want to leave this legacy. Hey, I want to share this information. Hey, I want the advantages that it does bring to the business, which is, hey, I get to be on your podcast because I've written a book. Like that's a pretty amazing aspect of getting a book published.
Yeah, I think those numbers are definitely true. And that's why I always practice what I preach is like, you don't write one book, you write a book in series, right? So I've published 10 of my own books and I'm working on my 11th one. But going back to your formula, the more books you publish over a longer period of time, the money just compounds as people find one book in out of 20 and they'll go back to the first book or go back to the second book. So like it becomes a domino effect over a period of time.
Yeah. Have you done any launches like Alex Hormozi did? I'm assuming you're familiar with Alex Hormozi. A lot of people are. His most recent book was $100 million Leads. Was it Leads? Yeah. Offers was the first one, and Leads. Phenomenal launch. I'm about to launch a podcast, and I'm in a mastermind group, and like, you need to do a launch with the podcast, and I hadn't even thought of that. I really also probably need to do some sort of launch with the book. Have you kind of gone through any of those processes?
Yeah, I mean, like literally every book that I do, sometimes I'll just let them slide because I'm using it not necessarily for a book for revenue. I'm using it more so for another model later on. But if I'm doing an actual book that I actually took extra time in perfecting that book, like those are the books. Like the next one, I'm definitely going to do more of a launch strategy. And there's so many different strategies out there. I mean, there's, you know, buy a book, get something free, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
typical, right? There's also buy 20 books and I'll give you a free consultation. Like there's
Yeah.
so many different opportunities and strategies for you. It could really be easy. Hey, the first 100 people to buy 20 books gets 2 bottles or a bottle or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So like that was a duality between the actual product and the book, and they know what they're getting, and that's why they're buying the books as well. And
Yeah.
then see they'll have 19 extra books that they can distribute to other people. So that's
Yeah.
how you get that mass distribution through a giveaway.
I do want to share. I've got a charity aspect to the book that I'm pretty proud of. The book's available on Amazon. You can go to the website. I think we had a link for you last time, and that link should still work. You correct me if I'm wrong. If not, I'll get it to you. Use that link, which will be in the show notes. But if you buy the book from our website, you can get a signed copy. That signed copy can be just from me for $10 or from me and Jerome for $15. 100% of the signature fee, so the $10 and the $15, goes to or Operation Underground Railroad. You may remember a movie called The Sound of Freedom about dealing with child sex trafficking. I saw him speak. That moved me. The movie was obviously moving as well. And so 100% of the signature fee goes directly to Operation Underground Railroad.
Very cool. Very cool. So any last words before we close out?
Well, there's a link. If anybody's interested in the book, they can click that link and find the book. If they're interested in trying the product, again, I would recommend olive oil. I typically all of our products are on whatever page that you'll land on. We have a 25% discount for subscriptions. Go ahead and take advantage of that discount.
Mhm.
Our customer service department has, I don't know, 850 plus 5-star reviews on Google. They are not trained to talk you out of canceling your subscription. If you want to, you can cancel at any time. Just take advantage of that discount. And then, yeah, give us feedback. We'd love to have some feedback about your experience on the product.
So I think closing out with that last statement about the subscription, right? I mean, how much and for how long does someone have to take this product to kind of see some of the results that, again, everyone's uniquely different, but on average?
Well, I'll share the two extremes, right? I have one video testimonial from a lady who took the product. In her video testimonial was at the end of the same day, and she said, I didn't need to finish my cup of coffee today, right? So same day result. And then there's another one, which I think is really poignant. I like this kind of testimonial. One of our larger distributors here in Houston, her name is Gwen. I did a video with her. She originally bought the product for her dog with no intent to take it, but actually noticed such a profound difference in her dog that she decided to start taking it. One, I love that because there is no placebo effect with dogs. Dogs don't trick their own minds into like, I got my dropper of whatever bacon flavored XYZ. And so today I'm going to have more energy and pep. No, they feel it or they don't. She took it. And then in that interview, she's like, if you had asked me at 3 months if I noticed anything, my initial response would have been no. But I took stock. I stopped for a second. I took stock of my life and I realized that I'm working later. I'm waking up earlier. I was never a morning person. And then I would kind of facetiously say, this is the worst testimonial about a supplement ever. I cleaned my garage. We don't use that in any marketing material, but it does mean something, right? Like what's holding you back from getting a big task like cleaning your garage is often energy. Maybe it's the emotional baggage that's in the garage or whatever. And we have testimonials that support both the energy. In fact, our most consistent testimonial is people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. If you're getting better sleep, you're going to be able to clean your garage. You're going to be able to handle the whatever emotional challenges of getting through that. So often people, I would say I'm going to go with about 20. This is total spitball. About 20 to 25% of people don't really notice until they go off. And then they're like, oh, okay, I need to get back on.
So I think that's definitely interesting because, I mean, obviously there's different variables of this product, right? I mean, you have a party recovery, you have an exercise recovery, a better sleep, and a focus and energy. So what's the chemical difference between these particular four products?
Would it surprise you if I told you none?
Marketing, 100%.
And here's the reality, right? If I'm sitting in front of somebody and I've got 2 minutes and I say, look, this is good for sleep and focus and energy and helps you party recovery, your thought process is no, that, it's got oil in it. So the first word's probably snake, right? Like that's just where your mind goes. As soon as we're able to start talking about those specific targeted symptoms, targeted applications, then people's mind open up and say, okay, well, I am interested in this. And then they allow you to tell the story. We know that, so there's risk. It took us a long time to pull the trigger on doing it. In my mind, it needed to have a different formula. And we know that there's a small percentage of customers who are going to order multiple of them, figure out that it's the same. We don't hide it, by the way. There's no, like, it's literally the same label. It's the products. But if they end up going, well, I need party recovery and I need focus and energy, and they buy them both and they get them and they're like, hey, they're the same thing, and they call us, we'll do it. That's a customer service issue. And again, we have 850 plus 5-star reviews. Our customer service team knows how to like refund the money or whatever the right thing to do is in this particular case. And we definitely, a lot of sales funnels will upsell other products. We would never upsell the same thing with a different label, right? Like that's when you end up, with very disgruntled customers. So it did take us a while, but the conversations that you have when you start with those boxes, I mean, you say like, hey, which one of these resonates with you more? Is it focus and energy? Is it sleep? Is it party recovery? Is it exercise recovery? And then their mind just goes to, okay, what are they going to deal with? And the mind, I find that piece fascinating, like how the mind works and how to get people to open up to the possibility of what the research is saying. I find that fascinating.
Very cool. Well, you heard it here from Chris, better known as the mad scientist boss himself. I mean, I think we could definitely talk about this and the chemistry behind it for probably hours on end, but I think this was definitely a solid episode. And whoever's listening right now, check out the product. I mean, pound for pound, technically speaking, based upon what he's saying, you potentially could live longer. So the opportunity to knock on that door if that's what you're looking for.
And SA, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, the pleasure was mine. SA Grant, over and out.